Guys, welcome back to the After Action Review. You guys know me. I'm Nick Guy. I'm the world's most okayest Green Beret. And with me, I have Christian, Marine who did 2 pumps over in Iraq back in the George W. Bush days. You guys probably followed a little bit of the discussion on Twitter vis-a-vis the difference in infantry tactics that we saw in Fallujah. So we'll be talking about some takeaways and where those differences might divert, as well as some cast differences of opinion that we might have. This is a little bit different than what we've usually done. Typically, I bring in guys that I know well or personally who have been in the community for a while and ask them, to comment. This is a little bit different, but it should be fun. It should be a little bit different than what you guys are used to. So with that, we got White Claw on board. And real quick, plug for a buddy of mine, Soul Attack. This guy is making phenomenal personal IFAKs for you guys to throw on your Boogaloo kit, or throw in the car, or give it to your girlfriend or your wife. And it's this really great pocket-sized IFAK. It's got a tourniquet, so you got your pressure dressing, the occlusive dressing, trauma pad, hemostatic agent, Curlex. You got medical tape, you got Gorilla tape, and you have a pair of exam gloves. So everything that you guys need for a little bit of trauma, a little TCCC that you guys might be dealing with. I got it in the Cryptech pattern because I'm a sucker for it. But this will actually be going in my girlfriend's car. I rock a full M9 kit bag in my truck, but this is perfect for your bug out kit or girlfriend or wife's car. So take a look. That's soulattack.com, or you can follow my man on Twitter. You guys know him as Shellsworth, but he's at Demp McGee. So with that said, Christian, thanks for coming on, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you and I got into a discussion, and it was admittedly a little heated, but that's okay. Regarding the differences in infantry tactics as perceived by some combat footage I had posted from the Battle of Fallujah. That was I believe that was like OIF 4 or 5, OIF 4, I think, maybe. I mean, I didn't spend any time in Iraq, so
hard to keep track.
Yep. But kind of going about what those soldiers on the rooftop were dealing with via your thoughts on what Marine Corps infantry would have done in that situation, things like that. So let me just preface, if you guys aren't familiar with the footage, one, you can shoot over to my Twitter page. It's on there. But it's combat footage, and I think it's phenomenal footage. It looks like it was almost professionally shot. Might have been an embed journo with them, but I think it shows really the calamity that comes from a urban combat environment. Video cuts, and it cuts to another scene where Bradley is on the streets and guys are on rooftops, and that particular engagement was when Staff Sergeant David Belavia had maneuvered on an enemy element and pretty much single-handedly cleared a building. He ended up murking four bad guys and injuring one, which his actions were warranted the Medal of Honor. So going into that, man, I know we had discussed this, but real quick, just to lay everything out from where you stood watching the video, I mean, what do you see being done differently from your background?
Well, a lot of people say the video is incomplete. It doesn't show assault element, which was there. And I kind of get that, but all I'm saying is it should have been there, but you don't see it in the video. You know what I mean? And
No, yeah, go ahead.
and I mean, a lot of times I know for a fact that the Army didn't do it. They wouldn't assault. It would be take cover and return fire, not necessarily assault through. And I'm pretty sure those the Army, the infantry troops over there in Fallujah were kind of on a screening position. I don't think they were supposed to push up too far, which maybe makes sense. But all I was just saying is that I don't think it was the best footage that there's ever been. I mean, I can't say I can pick out all that much better. I don't really sit around watching it, but I wasn't too impressed just by the footage alone. You know what I mean?
Okay. So OIF was before my time. Just to give you a quick background, I didn't become operational in what I did for the Army until 2015. I graduated my qualification course in 2015 and deployed at the very end of 2015. And then I did 3 trips to Syria. So I was on that sort of GWAT tail end of the GWAT. I didn't spend any time in Iraq or Afghanistan. All of my deployments were to Syria. But when I did talk to, I talked to Joe Kent. Joe Kent, if you're unfamiliar, he's a Green Beret. He's a Gold Star husband of Shannon Kent, who was a Navy Special Operations crypto tech who was killed in Manbij, Syria, just over a year ago. But he has a long history in special operations, and so I defer to his expertise in terms of Fallujah. So he was on the ground in Fallujah with ODA 535. Let me just double check. Yep, 535. And he was explaining how everybody, Marines and Army, were kind of in these static firing positions in the first 2 days of the Fallujah campaign because of basically what is tantamount to phase lines as part of the overall CAS plan in the city. And when I say CAS plan, I kind of say that using some common terms, since it's not actual CAS unless you have a JTAC controlling. This would be more of a air interdiction mission for my other JTACs or any pilots listening. But basically, there was a master GRG and phase lines were drawn. And so in the first 2 days of Fallujah, everything was basically static because nobody was allowed to progress past those phase lines. And that would have been Marines as well. But I mean, looking at Marine doctrine, I mean, would that have changed anything, or would have phase lines dictated by air cover still facilitated the assault through tactics that you advocate that the Marine Corps would have used in that position?
Yeah, I mean, from what I've seen, yeah, because I mean, I've been on ops. I mean, I could think of one op in particular where we did a recon the day before, and we weren't supposed to move ahead of a certain phase line. We weren't supposed to enter into a village, but as soon as we took fire, it was all good to just assault through. So we ended up right on Main Street when we weren't supposed to be. The op was supposed to kick off the next day, but we ended up a day early just because we took fire on a reconnaissance, so we just pushed up. I can't say if those guys were in the wrong if they wouldn't have done the same. They might have had much more strict instructions, but I think just by the book as a general rule, yeah, even if you could say this is our phase line, but if you're getting attacked, you attack back. That's what I've seen. That's what my unit did.
I mean, honestly, in that position, I mean, I wasn't there. I'm not in the habit of armchair quarterbacking because I wasn't there. But I'm saying,
right.
I'm not saying like phase lines. I'm not saying phase lines is part of an assault or as part of a raid or as part of an ambush. Talking phase lines that are dictated by a master GRG coming out of the combined air operations center and saying, listen, we can't have any forces beyond phase line Budweiser or phase line Amelia because we're running air interdiction missions. And literally that could be talk casts, that could be tactical operations centers, close air support where there's a JTAC miles and miles away looking through feeds, and then calling those strikes, or they could be those air interdiction missions where there's no JTAC controlling. It's just the aircraft and they have a pre-assigned set of targets. So if in the opening days when this footage was shot, I mean, you can talk all you want about, why they're static, but I mean, if you're in that situation and it comes down from higher, listen, there are to be no U.S. forces beyond phase line Budweiser because we are literally dropping GBU 32s from sun up till sundown. So does that change your perception of whether or not we assault through the objective?
I mean, I'm sure it does. I mean, these things are always different. Like, if you're on Desert Shield, you can't just turn it into Desert Storm because someone took a pot shot at you. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I guess if they're bombing or whatever, yeah, don't go in. But it wouldn't be typical is all I'm saying. Like, I'm sure that would be a very much atypical situation. I mean, I'm not saying, like, those dudes in the Army weren't, like, good guys or whatever. Or I'm not saying they just bitched out by not going on the assault. I'm just saying it's not the most impressive infantry work I've ever seen. You know what I mean? Like,
well, no, I mean,
shooting back and forth across a roof in a static position, I'll do that all day. You know what I mean? Like, no problem. Those roofs in Iraq are really nice. They're really great fighting positions. I mean, who would want to leave one? You know what I mean?
Well, I think the controversy came from the fact that an inter-service rivalry is fine. And you're right. You could be of the opinion. I've never seen footage as clear or as realistic. I think people have preconceived notions of what combat looks like. And I think that I really enjoyed that video because it kind of pulls that away and kind of brings it back to reality as to what combat is actually like. But the argument and all the traffic that thread created kind of came from the fact that, listen, if that was the Marine Corps, that's fine. We would have assaulted through. But, like I said, I wasn't in Fallujah, but when I'm talking to guys who were, it was the Marine Corps, it was the Army. Everybody was relegated. So even though they might have been taking fire just a block and a half or 2 blocks away, which that opening shot of the video looks like might have even been a block. That MSR that separated the building they occupied and the building occupied by enemy combatants, that MSR could have been the phase line. And then you had to bring into minimum safe distances and danger close considerations when dropping munitions and whether or not there was a JTAC on the roof, things like that. So, I mean, it was more just, I wanted you on here not to necessarily fight, but to kind of hash out this conversation in a long form method. So we weren't just relegated to 100, 200, whatever characters Twitter is. But I wanted to put that out here so people listening, people looking at that could realize, hey, the first and second day of Fallujah, like literally there were 0 maneuver elements that had freedom of movement to assault through an objective or anything like that. And that went for the Marines as well. Those were AO specific. I wouldn't call them rules of engagement. But those are definitely hard and fast left and right limits.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, find that hard to believe at all. Especially just the way that they did that was multiple units, kind of trying to move up along with each other. No one wanted to get ahead too far or whatnot. But I mean, it just wasn't the most spectacular thing. I'm sure there's got to be better footage from Iraq. I mean, but in general, I gotta say, I mean, the Army doesn't typically go on the assault like that. I mean, they're much more likely to hunker down, call in air, and even a lot of these big OPs, their QRF isn't going to move out of there. You know, if they take a major assault, they're not heading out the gates to fight. You know, they're just going to return fire from behind cover. You see it over and over. I mean, I'm sure Army people could admit that. Like,
I mean, I've never witnessed it. I think doctrinally, the United States Army Infantry operates off of the Ranger Handbook, which is the gold standard of small unit tactics. I don't know if the Marine Corps Infantry utilize it. The Raiders I've worked with are very familiar with the Ranger Handbook. But was that something that you guys utilize to kind of set your SOPs and TTPs?
You know, we have the 6-5. I mean, a lot of guys, maybe high speed, would get the Ranger Handbook or something. But at the end of the day, you know, your SOPs are set at squad level. You know, platoon and just by squad, people would just hash out their own SOPs. And typically, you just abandon anything like the 6-5 or any kind of handbook. I know.
That's kind of, that seems nuts to me. Like, and that could be, I'm not saying it's not the case. I'm just saying that seems nuts to me that you literally have SOPs and TTPs down to the squad level in terms of how you execute, you know, infantry basics, like, you know, react to contact or a simple ambush or a raid. I mean, does that not create just total havoc when you're operating in, you know, a platoon size element, a company element?
No, because I mean, most of it was squad level. Most firefights I was in was on a squad level. You know what I mean? And basically, it's squad, and then maybe meets QRF, meets, you know. There weren't a lot of major a company-sized assault, a battalion.
But what about like a platoon? Like, even though that squad is moving and reacting to contact and doing all the things that, you know, a squad would do. I mean, how's that fair in terms of like platoon control? I mean, your platoon is going to be your lowest level of officer control with that LT taking control of those elements. So I mean, you kind of see where I'm getting at. Like, all these squads running their own SOPs or their own takes on 5-6, whatever the Marine Corps.
The 6-5.
6-5.
But in general, I mean, a Marine rifle platoon is going to be led by a boot, technically. I mean, you're talking about a butter bar lieutenant who doesn't know anything. So, yeah, he knows the 6-5, and everybody else knows that he knows that. But you know, everyone, once you get to the fleet in the Marine Corps, everyone knows you kind of throw out what you learned in School of Infantry, and people don't really refer back to the 6-5. I mean, that might be dumb, but that just was how it was when I was going through.
Ooh.
And
All right,
I remember
go ahead.
You know, you'd reach out to other team leaders, other squad leaders, find out what people are doing in their area, because there was a lot of different Iraq wars depending on where you were. You know what I mean? So you did have to work out SOPs at a very micro level.
Okay. So, all right. So I learned something new. It seems like that might get tricky in terms of command and control of a larger element. And, you know, I understand squads can operate on an autonomous level, but, you know, typically speaking, when knowing, especially in a situation like well, I mean, we don't need to take it back to Fallujah, but any element. But taking it back to that, if you got one squad operating on this system and another squad, you know, operating on this system, if you task, that first squad with establishing that ORP and that second squad to push up and do some recon of an objective area or something like that, like if everybody's working on different systems, to me that seems like it would just be a nightmare.
Well, I think you might be thinking that like you're throwing out everything. You know what I mean? Like just completely. There's no framework that everyone kind of shares. There's that much that's just drilled into, I think, any Marine. I'm just saying that there's a lot more to it. I mean, there wasn't really a good manual for everything you needed to know for Iraq. When you show up to, you left seat, right seat, and then you find out what you need to know for your AO. It's not going to be in a manual. You know what I mean? You'll know basically the framework on how every Marine unit will generally operate. No one's going to totally just do something just completely different. You know what I mean? Like everyone else can do this, but my squad's doing that, but just the way you do it might be, pretty stylized.
All right. We'll leave that. We'll leave that right there. Cause like I said, I don't like to armchair quarterback. I don't even like to really play armchair quarterback with conventional Army stuff because I didn't spend any time in the conventional Army, but just going go ahead.
You're a Green Beret though. So, I mean, you have infantry background,
I do.
I think you can understand this stuff.
And all of our, like I said, our small unit tactics are the basics. It's one thing that Green Berets pride themselves on is mastery of the basics. It's not sexy. We're not doing helocats every day like SEALs or doing dynamic shoot houses or things like that. We do those things, but we spend a lot of time mastering the basics. We master the Ranger Handbook, that Battle Drill 1 Alpha, that basic raid, that basic ambush, things like that. So coming from my background, I enlisted, to be a Green Beret. I went through infantry school. Is that enough to make me a infantry expert? No, but that's my background. So, all right, we'll leave it at that, man. Like I said, that could just be a fundamental difference in branches that I'm not familiar with. I have plenty of Marines following the podcast, so I'm sure they'll weigh in, as well as a few who jumped from Marine to Army. So moving on. So the next clip I wanted to talk about was that Bradley, and we talked about you were talking about that Bradley moving up ahead of that support by fire, but I disagreed because looking at the Bradley, looking at where that support by fire position on the rooftop, that footage with the Bradley is the specific firefight in which Sergeant Fallujah conducted his actions, which earned him the Medal of Honor. And what you're not seeing on camera, and that's what I was trying to explain, but I want to hash it out here. So you have these guys on the rooftop. Let me just lay out a picture if you guys haven't seen it. You have these guys on the rooftop. Guys are laying down the scunion. You got saws, you got 240s, you got M4s, and you got a Bradley rolls up, and they were taking contact from a house that looked to be about 100 meters away. But the Bradley was in very narrow streets, and it couldn't traverse its gun to really lay down effective fire. So that Bradley comes in to support the support by fire and to add an additional element to that support by fire. So you have your machine guns talking. You got your couple 249s up there. You got the Bradley laying down some 25 millimeter and even fires a tow. But like I said, they weren't able to really affect where they knew the bad guys were. So off camera, a maneuver element moved off and in a flanking maneuver engaged those bad guys. I don't know how Fallujah got separated. I don't. I've read the citation. I will admit I've not read his book. I have not yet. It's on my things to do. I have it coming via Amazon. When I found this footage, the first thing I did was order it. But somehow, I don't know if he actually gets separated or if he just has a hard charging moment and goes into the house. But a maneuver element gets in, takes contact from the house. So, like I said, online, like that's a basic raid straight out of the Ranger handbook. With a few minor changes to kind of accommodate this urban environment. You know, with this Ranger handbook rate, anything that I practice and the SGT portion of the Q course was kind of rural. You have an enemy camp or whatever in the middle of the woods, whatever. They had to kind of tweak that. But you have this maneuver element. So you have this support by fire and this maneuver element. So the disagreement that you and I had was whether or not that rooftop was just a support by fire position, or it was just the Army hunkering down again. So right. I mean, so knowing that Bradley moves up, yeah, it technically goes beyond that support element, that base of fire. It technically does because they're trying to swing those guns. But I mean, like, again, I don't know 6-5, but I know, listen, you get that support by fire position, you have your assault element that takes a bold, well, in this case, it's probably not that bold, but a flanking maneuver and engages that house. So again, like, that just seems like, hey, taking the basics, taking the very basics of infantry tactics and applying them to your setting. So I know you and I had a disagreement on that again. So I wanted to give you the time to expand on your thoughts on that particular footage.
Well, I mean, I don't think I need to expand that much. I mean, doesn't it look like they went out ahead? Like, that was the maneuver element? Like, that's what it looked like to me in the footage.
Well, I mean, in the footage, and here, let me pull it up. I'll pull it up. So going through that footage, I mean, that Bradley only really, I gotta mute that. That Bradley is, all right, so there's the tow. So the Bradley's online with the support by fire when the tow is launched. Moving forward. Yeah, so it's maybe 5 meters ahead because they wanted to get to a wider part of that road to see if they could get guns on. And the Bradley actually rotates 90 degrees to present its side down the road. But, you know, going to that, man, like, you know, I've never worked with Bradleys, but I'd imagine, like, if you're a guy on the ground and Bradley rolls up, I know doctrinally Bradleys are maneuver elements in the Army, but if it can join a support by fire and just give you a little more oomph with that gun line, it makes sense. But I don't think moving 5 meters beyond your gun line is utilizing it as a maneuver element.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I don't think so either. You know, just poke it ahead a little bit. But if you're saying they can't move up, but the Bradley can move up, and in the video they're saying, hey, why doesn't it move up? You know, they're like, go up. Yeah, I mean, you could be right, but
well, I mean, that probably came from all the sources that certain units were running in Fallujah that were letting everybody know that it was an IED. It was a party with IEDs on the roads. But I mean, like I said, and that Bradley is maybe 5 meters ahead, and the gun line is elevated, so they're still able to lay down that base of fire. And as soon as they called for shift fire, like, the Bradley was done. Like, when they called the shift fire, the Bradley didn't maneuver. It shifted fire, and then it ceased fire. So, I mean, again, looking at it, you know, it seems like it's really just a gun in the gun line.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. We would do the same, but I know we did use Brads, and we used them much different. Like, they weren't our maneuver element at all. Like, I mean, it's an infantry fighting vehicle, I guess, from the Army's perspective, but when we had brads attached to us, we used them much different.
How'd you use them?
We would use them to like hold down a road, block a road. You know what I mean? Like blocking positions and things like that. That's mostly how we use them, and we liked them, but they weren't our maneuver element at all. A screening element, really, and really useful. I wish we had them. I liked them, but I'd be worried about sending a Brad like that up ahead. They do go down. Like IEDs do take them out. Rockets do take them out.
Yeah, 5 meters though, I wouldn't say is moving ahead. That's not
yeah, but I
really
wouldn't go
moving
much further than that.
your pieces across the chess table.
Yeah, but I wouldn't go much further than that. You know what I mean?
All right.
Like,
So, all right, man. Well, we covered that. We covered that ad nauseum. I do want to get into a little bit of this cast talk. I nerd out on JTACkery. It's the single best school I've ever been to in the Army. It's the one aspect of my job that I love the most is being a JTAC. I love it. I love working inter service, working with other branches. I love the opportunities it's presented me. JTACs are always in demand. Now that I'm just in the National Guard doing SF things, JTACs are always needed for deployments, so it gets me to the front of the line. But when I was active duty, it was a huge, huge boost to a team in terms of, vying for missions, things like that. If you can provide your own air, that was a huge deal when I was active, and it still plays into the Guard now. But going into that, so let me pull up the thread just so we keep everything here. So, all right. So talking about, you talked about how F-18s all around work, A-10s are more inefficient. And if you just need something like having a JDAM delivered, all you need is an F-18. And there was a response saying, hey, F-18, it's a gas guzzler. They were designed to go feet dry, drop ordnance, and get back to the boat. And you'd mentioned that's what we want is we don't want air overhead because that could take away from the fight. So I wanted to kind of bring that. I wanted to talk about that because in my experience, I know in a lot of dudes' experience, it's the fight is always going to be better if you know that you have air above head and you have somebody on the ground who's able to call in ordnance efficiently and effectively. So I kind of wanted to talk about that, where your mindset is saying, hey, get that air out of here. If we need a bomb, we'll call them in. They'll drop the bomb. They'll get the hell out of here.
Well,
go ahead.
I'll say Iraq was a much more infantry-heavy war. You know what I mean? We're talking about the use of ground troops going in. Like you say you were in Syria. Well, there weren't any ground troops in Syria. It was all air. But how long did that take? You know what I mean? Like, ISIS was around for years and years. How long did they need to be around? Send in the infantry, they're done. Saddam Hussein didn't last a month. You know what I mean? Like, ISIS wouldn't have lasted years and years. I think air power, way overrated. You don't need it. Infantry doesn't need to rely too much on it. I mean, if you're fighting people that don't even have shoes and have like crummy rifle, do you really need air? Like, I never felt like I really needed it.
I mean, personally, I'd rather just call in a small diameter bomb than take a stack into a building with the unknown.
I would never. Okay, one thing I wouldn't want to do is go in. If I go into a building and there's someone barricaded into the building and they just want you to go in there and get in. I'm not trying to do a CQB type thing. Yeah, by all means, back off, call a bomb on it. Just bring up a Mark 19, bring up CAT, and just level the building. But To
Man,
think you
those
just
I don't know, man. Those Middle East buildings, they ate up those 40 Mike rounds, man. I don't know what
they
I
did.
don't know what they were putting in the mud, dude. I don't know what they were putting in the mud that made them so tough.
They
But
are really
I mean, honestly,
solid.
like,
Yeah.
but I mean, like, I'm not asking, like, of course, like, listen, like, you train to go into you train to go into the building, you train, but if you have source on the ground saying there's only bad guys there, if you have pattern of life that says there are only bad guys here, I mean, I'm gonna call in that error, hands down. And even if we're maneuvering, to an objective, I'm gonna want air on station because you don't know what they're gonna throw at you. At least in Syria, I know
Okay.
in Iraq too, the VBID threat was a very real thing. That was a very
Yeah.
real thing. They up armored those like a mother. I mean, they threw inches of armor on those vehicles. Like they would eat up everything. And the
Yeah,
only
I've been
thing that
hit by them.
well, yeah, I mean, so you can have an infantry platoon or even less. It sounds like you guys are rolling squad heavy. If you got a squad. Hey, there's nothing organic to that squad that could take down an armored VBID. There's nothing. 40 Mike, AT4, probably not. Maybe a Carl G, but I'm not waiting until 300 meters to engage that. I'm not. 400 meters, I think is. I'm not a Bravo. I'm sure an 18 Bravo will chime in and say, oh, the max effective range of the Carl Gustav is 450. No, it doesn't matter. So my point is when you're rolling these small elements, like, wouldn't you want that? Me personally, like, I don't want to die in Syria. I don't want to die in that country. So if I can roll out with constant air cover, I'm going to. I'm not going to worry about it taking away from my
Yeah, but
ground pounder
what if you don't have
experience.
it? You know what I mean? Like, are you just not going to fight that? Are you not going to roll out if you don't have the air?
I
You know
mean,
what I mean?
typically nowadays, yeah, the political climate and the risk aversion at the Pentagon means, yeah, nobody's rolling out without air. But
Right.
nowadays air is plentiful.
Yeah,
I
but
mean, I would have F-15s on station out of Turkey, and they'd stay around and play, and I'd have F-18s out off the carrier in the Gulf. And then I'd bring like some F-22s would come on and play, and they were kind of useless because the only way they would drop a bomb is if we were actually troops in contact, because they don't have a targeting pod. They have this thing called synthetic aperture radar, and it basically it draws the ground. It's really good technology. Like, it's a picture. It's like Matrix style. Like, it draws the ground like Matrix style, and whatever it's looking at. And you can have moving vehicles and things like that. But they won't drop a bomb unless you have like what we call a mensurated grid, like a category 1 grid. So like you need a grid that's within 1 meter's difference, things like that. So anyways, the F-22s were garbage for CAS, but F-18s, F-15s, A-10s. I mean, like, but if I had a choice, man, like even Iraq, they would fly cap, man. Like they would just fly in an AO where multiple units were operating, and when a unit would need them, they were only really a minute or 90 seconds off because they were already basically in the overhead.
yeah, I mean,
So
there are downsides to that too. That's where most aircraft get shot down. If you look, where you got these holding patterns and all that, or they're just flying around waiting, or they're the repeat kind of target. It's not. I mean, I think it's fine to just call in a strike, and if they're in and out, it's fine.
all right. So
I mean, I think the over reliance on air is the biggest problem, where people can't operate without air.
well, I
They
think
need
that's risk aversion at the highest echelons.
well,
It's not that's not the team on the ground.
I
And
mean, I think
well,
what would
I mean honestly, like if they're flying combat air patrol, I mean, the last time an American aircraft was shot down was April 8th, 2003, and it wasn't shot down flying combat air patrol. It was shot down while they were conducting an attack. It was shot down by a Roland air-to-air surface-to-air missile, which is a super short-range missile.
Sure. But
and that was the last time, was 2003. So literally a week into the invasion, or maybe 2 weeks into the invasion, whatever that is. I mean, that was the last time.
We're not fighting people with actual air defenses. You know what I mean? Like, of course, that's the last time. When that's the last time you fought someone with an air defense. I mean, you talk about the future, though. You got to think of those things, and you're just gonna have your troops can't move if they don't have air. They just can't move. Think about that. Like,
well, no,
why
they
can't
can't.
the infantry?
There's something doctrinally that says that they can't.
Yeah, but it's gonna work out that way. Won't it? If you always have air, then you don't. I mean, you're gonna feel a little bit like
near peer to peer, man. No, that's not going to be the case, and I'd stake my reputation on that. I really would. If we were fighting a near peer or a peer adversary that had sophisticated anti-aircraft systems and a sophisticated air force, no, and we were not able to immediately establish air superiority, then I am firmly of the opinion that the infantry and special operations and armor and cav and artillery would move out just as they were without it. I don't think it's an over reliance on it. I don't think your average infantry officer is not relying on air. He's not.
Okay, the average infantry officer is not being used at all, and only air is. You think how many? Like,
well, right now we're in a low intensity. We're in a super low intensity conflict in Syria.
Oh, really? I don't think so. I mean, we're talking about like ISIS. I think we should have taken them down way sooner. You know what I mean? Like, instead they're like launching terror attacks into Europe for years.
Syria is not a good. That's not a good operational environment for conventional forces. It's not.
I disagree. I think everything is a good environment for conventional forces, and I think ISIS operated conventionally. If you look at a lot of their assaults, they were conventional assaults. They had armor and all that logistics.
Well, yeah, I mean, so does SAW. Special operations conduct conventional assaults all the time. Like,
yeah, but what they really relied on were like these Kurdish militias and things like that, like these Maoist Kurdish groups and things. These like kind of Marxist terrorist groups, really. And then instead of using our actual infantry troops, it didn't make a lot of sense. And I mean, you're just not using infantry. It's not being used anymore. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I mean, but like I said, the infantry is a conventional force. It's a blunt instrument. It's when you absolutely 100% need it dead, and you don't care how it gets done. I mean, let's not sugarcoat it.
Right, and
so
it works.
And I'm saying Syria is not that environment. When we could rely on a partner force like the Kurds, and say what you want about them. I'm not that thrilled about their political beliefs either. And I understand the fact that the YPG and the YPJ were allies of convenience and not of any sort of political or cultural alignment with Western ideals. No, they were a tool to be used in the campaign. It's an uncomfortable truth. Nobody wanted to admit it, especially during the withdrawal and the perceived betrayal of the Kurds, but that's what they were. They're very different from the Iraqi Kurds, who we have a much closer, societal and political alignment to with
I agree.
With the Kurdish regional government versus the Rojava of Syria or whatever. But my point is you didn't need to. When you can conduct the operations with air power and small special operations teams, that is the move. I mean, we saw. I mean, the Russians and the Turks and the Syrian Arab army all ran conventional operations against ISIS, and ISIS chewed them up and spit them out. Like that wasn't the environment. Like you can throw whatever you want at these guys, but ISIS, I don't care if you have an infantry company, unless you're bringing in an army with armor and God.
That's what I'm saying to do.
Dude,
like that's my point.
That's so expensive and
But you know what? Then don't go to war. You know what I mean?
Listen, I'm not saying. I'm just saying. Me personally, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. I have my personal opinions. I have my political opinions about Syria. I've made my thoughts on Middle East quagmires very clear on this podcast before. But listen, ISIS. You did not need 30,000 infantry troops. We didn't have the logistics. Dude, like when I was over there, we there weren't even rat lines to support us. Like we had a set amount of MREs and we were living off the local economy. I don't know. I don't know of any country's local economy that can support a friggin' brigade of infantry soldiers. I don't.
It'll fall into place. That's how you invade a country. That's how you conduct invasions. Like it's not like,
but it wasn't. We didn't overthrow Syria. Syria is such a geopolitical. It's so conflated in a geopolitical sense. We weren't overthrowing the government. We were overthrowing a de facto government that had set up shop within the borders of a sovereign nation. That's what makes it so difficult. Like it wasn't Iraq where we wanted to conduct regime change. Right or wrong for it, we conducted regime change. What we did in Syria was we went after a de facto country that had literally set up shop within the sovereign borders of another country that we did not want to overthrow, or at least the United States military didn't. The Title 10 mission was very clear. The Title 10 mission in Syria said that no Syrian Arab army forces were to be engaged. It was very clear. We did not go in there to overthrow Assad. We went in there to kill ISIS. So
I don't think the U.S. ever had any interest in overthrowing Assad. I don't think the U.S. ever really wanted to. Like, you know what I mean? Like, but either way, if you need to take care of ISIS, and we were invited to Iraq, and we didn't use ground troops over there either. You know, it'd be a lot easier.
When?
If we needed to overthrow ISIS and Assad said no, you can't do that, you could still go anyway and overthrow ISIS because
we did. He didn't say you couldn't do that. He didn't.
That's what I mean.
Anything.
So then send in the ground troops. He can't say anything. You know what I mean? Like be like. Well,
I don't know
our country.
It gets really, really complicated when you have Russia propping up the economy and the military of Syria. And you know, sure, Assad might say, no, we're not allowed here. But the Russians say, no, we don't want Americans here. And then Assad parrots them and says these things. So that's why you have these small teams that are operating in, constricted geographic barriers to avoid this. Because it is a geopolitical cluster. It is. And we even had a couple instances of U.S. and Russian forces.
Then basically you're saying, like, okay, we got to take ISIS down, but it's going to take years and years because we don't want to make Assad bad.
Honestly,
I'm a firm believer.
No, I'm a firm believer that comes into who's in office. And I'm again, I'm not trying to get political here. I'm saying we saw a far more efficient game plan and rules of engagement under the current administration than we did in the last. And I'll say that.
I mean,
once it was opened up to allow teams to do what they needed to do, it was over fairly quick. We could do it with the air power. We could do it with the soft. So, but we got off on a tangent here. I want to swing back because I don't want to keep you too late. We've been going for a while, but I want to go back to this CAS platform because we didn't get to nerd out.
All right.
You talked about the F-18 as being your choice for a CAS platform over the A-10, and I want to know why. Because you're the first ground pounder I've ever met that says, I'll take a fast mover fighter jock that wishes he was shooting MiGs out of the sky over a pilot who was crazy enough to fly a bathtub at 300 feet AGL and eat up AK rounds and anti-aircraft fire to deliver gun runs. You're the first one. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, here's what it'll mostly come down to is my own experience. And, you know, I see a lot of JDAMs, you know, efficiently delivered on target. But you know what? The only time I really even saw A-10 was I was in Korea and just flying around in Blackhawks, and they're shooting. I mean, it was really cool seeing them shoot their guns off at targets, but they just weren't that useful for us in Iraq. And I think they weren't used that much. I don't really know why, but I don't think they got that much.
That could have been an AO thing because A-10s got after it. And A-10s just don't have those guns. I mean, A-10s have twice as many hard points on their wings than F-18s.
Sure, yeah.
So they can carry twice as many JDAMs. So, like I said, that take kind of surprised me. Maybe it was just your personal opinion, your personal experience, but I honestly, yeah, the guns are cool, but they're limited in application. Calling in a gun run is awesome as the guy on the radio. But they are more than capable, and they're the type of pilot whose sole purpose in life is to support the guy on the ground. That's their whole mission. They get into that cockpit with very little ego, knowing that they are a support element for the guy on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they do they do a great job. They're really cool, but I mean, I'm really fine if a pilot just wants to show up and just put a JDAM right where you want it and just bug out. I'm comfortable with that. You know, like I never complained like that's not enough. Like that's not enough for me. You know.
There's a lot of considerations that go into it. Is what is the ground force commander willing to buy? The GFC and the JTAC buy the bomb. So it's not the pilot's discretion to just come in and say, "Hey, that building looks like it needs to be destroyed. I'm going to drop a precision guided munition on it."
Right, you're calling them in, yeah.
But typically, in order to do that, they need to be like in the overhead. They need to be on station.
Yeah.
Like especially with F-18s. Like F-18s don't have satellite communication systems. They don't, because they're a naval aircraft. They were designed to operate in that sphere of the carrier battle group, and they would never be further away than, line of sight comms distance. So if you're going to employ an F-18, like you can't call an F-18 that's on combat air patrol 50 miles away as the guy on the ground and say, "Hey, we need a bomb here." Like they need to be in the overhead. So that's like going back to your point, like, "Oh, I don't want them in the overhead." Like that's what was so confusing. Can't, some aircrafts do have SATCOM. Very few JTACs are pulling SATCOM kits out to talk to aircraft because they're in the overhead. But especially with like an F-18, like the only way you're going to get comms with him is if he is, well, he doesn't need to be in the overhead. The overhead is 5 nautical miles, but he needs to be in that area of operation. And that's the only way. Like you can't call, like on-call CAS is a thing, but it's typically more of a special operations thing. Like, hey, we're going to hit this house. And that's like, I'm talking like high-level special operations. I'm not talking about Whiteside, Green Berets, or SEALs, or Raiders like me. I'm talking special mission units, and they're conducting, a high-profile raid. And you don't want jet engines in the air above you. So they might have like on-call CAS. Like those birds are on the tarmac, engines on, just waiting for the go-ahead. Like that's a thing. But in terms of like what we saw in Iraq, Syria, things like that wasn't the case. So, that's me, man. Like, listen, I put out a list of my definitive fixed wing CAS platforms that I like. I still think the A-10 is king. It carries a lot more weight than an F-18. F-18, they were giving me like 35 minutes of playtime in Syria. That was it. They were on station for 35 minutes. That's all they could give me.
Yeah.
Because they're not fuel efficient. They don't have large gas tanks. They were going off, and they were hitting the tanker. At least with like the F-15s, or the F-22s or the A-10s. Like, well, the A-10s can loiter. My God, they have like 2 hours, 15 minutes, 2 hours, 20 minutes of playtime off the tanker. It's incredible. F-15s, you get about an hour, hour 5. It's awesome. And then they do yo-yo ops. So then one gets gas, the other one's still in the overhead, and then they yo-yo. F-18s, man. I like the Navy pilots that I have no idea of knowing if they were Marine or Navy. I mean, they had their call signs, and they were definitely Marine call signs and Navy call signs. But I like the F-18 drivers. I thought they were a lot of fun. They had a lot of females that sounded really attractive on the radio. Were F-18 drivers. So, 5.5 months into a deployment, that sounds great. But yeah, man, that I'm going to go ahead and say I vehemently disagree as a JTAC, like just not even as personal opinion, just like actual metrics of looking at CAS platforms. Like F-18s are, it's not a good CAS platform. Plus, because they have to land on carriers, dude, their pods, they can't run the latest and greatest hotness in terms of targeting pods, because the jolt of landing on a carrier is massive, and these delicate Air Force instruments that they run on 15s, 16s, and F-35, or the Air Force F-35s, or B-1s, or ACs. Those targeting. Yeah. So the Navy's like running like 25-year-old technology, because it's the only ones that are tough enough to survive that. So yeah, man, just from all those metrics, like playtime, technology, how many bombs they're bringing to the fight, what, their loadout. Yeah, I'm very much disagreeing.
I mean, I'm not really going to try to argue that one. Like, you definitely had like a much more air-centric experience. You know what I mean? Like, but yeah, I mean, you're probably right by all means. But I always thought the F-18, no complaints. But
all right, man. Well, I want to thank you for dropping by. I had fun. I love talking shop.
Yeah, right on. It was fun.
Yep. All right, man.
All right. Well, it's nice meeting you.
You too, man. Take it easy.
Hey, take care.
All right, guys. So that was Christian. Take it or leave it. With the whole purpose of this podcast is to educate and get your minds churning a little bit and thinking. So I'm glad you guys were able to stop by, and hopefully it spurs a little bit of debate. I'm getting better at remembering this. Dead plate. Thank you. Guys, if you like this, if you like the podcast, if you're watching it on YouTube, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and comment. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you guys are listening to it on Spotify or iTunes, go ahead and leave me a 5-star review. I really appreciate it. I'm not, again, I don't do the whole fundraising for this. I don't have the Patreon for this, because I'm not that good at it, and I'm busy with other things in my life, so I can't really produce the type of content that I think is worth paying for. Again, big shout out to Solitac, dude. Demp, it's a top-notch product, man. It is. Hey, this is all the same stuff that I was rocking in my IFAC overseas. Like, it is. It's not the cheap stuff. It's not the stuff you get at the drugstore. Like, this is an actual tactical trauma kit. You're basically going to be able to stop the bleeding with this. And if we all know from our TCCC class days, stopping the bleeding is one of the very important things to do. You got to stop that bleeding. So again, Demp, thank you very much, guys. Solattack.com. Feel free to share this podcast, guys. I really enjoyed doing it. And thanks for stopping by.